Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 11th Field Notes live event. My name is David Hoover, and I'm the director of the National Soil Survey Center and your moderator for these Field Notes webinars. We usually have a greeting from a Field Notes regional representative now. Instead, I'd like to share with you a couple of resources. So usually they talk about these three things, and I'll just give you the names and the links. So first, there are the regional committee members for Field Notes. Please contact them for more information or to volunteer for an upcoming presentation. We're always glad to be able to feature what's going on in the country. And these are your folks to help set that up. So take a note of who your regional contact is and step up and volunteer. Second, there's a link for the team's Field Notes channel, where there are lots of resources, such as tips for making presentations. And third, there's the link for the National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel, where all the videos are housed, just in case you want to binge watch while it's a blizzard outside or something. So we have selected two exciting topics for you today, and we encourage you to ask questions at any time using the Q&A panel. The Q&A panel should open by default. However, if for some reason your Q&A panel is not open, simply click on the question mark icon located on the right side of your screen. For closed captions, turn on the live caption button located in the lower right corner. Today's session is being recorded. Recorded sessions are available in Teams on the Field Notes channel and the National Soil Survey Center's YouTube channel, which I just showed you the addresses for. Again, thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed today's session. Our first presentation today will be from Mike Sousa from the Wasilla, Alaska office and Phil Barber from the Homer, Alaska office, talking about the Willow National Petroleum Reserve soil survey work in fiscal year 21. I turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Dave. We're dealing with a little bit of lag here between your guys' internet and ours up here. We went through this morning and on some of the slide presentations, we had up to 10 seconds of delay. So if we have any troubles today, we just ask that you guys bear with us. So my name is Michael Sousa. I'm a soil scientist here in Wasilla, Alaska. And with me today giving this presentation will be Phil Barber. He's an ecologist in Homer, Alaska. And we're going to tell you guys a little bit about one of our projects we had last summer up on the north slope of Alaska, which is the Willow NPRA. You go ahead and advance the slide, Phil.
I'm trying.
This is the lag we were talking about, but I have a black screen now, so I think it's coming. Okay, so this is just to get you guys situated a little bit of what or where exactly the project was. So you can see in the bottom right there, that's a map of Alaska, obviously, and the red dots are way up on the northern slope. So all these red dots are transect lines that we visited while we were out there, and the blue dot, or the blue star rather, is where our camp was located. This area is about 1 million acres, and we visited over 200 sample sites. One of the things that's quite a bit different about Alaska compared to what I would imagine surveys look like in other areas are the travel logistics. So we do have some projects that are off the road system here, but those have been thoroughly investigated for the most part, and the areas that are a little bit more difficult to get to are the ones that we're focusing on now. So for this project, we had folks from the Fairbanks office, the Homer office, and the Wasilla office. Basically, everybody found their own way to Fairbanks, and then from Fairbanks, we chartered a commercial aircraft out to a small BLM maintained airstrip named 4AK1, and that's where we had set up our operations for this trip. So here's a picture of that base camp. I'm not sure exactly when this was built, but it's been there for quite a while. I would guess at least 10 years, maybe 15. It has very basic amenities. There's a place, this big dome that you can see in the center with the solar panels. It's kind of a meeting place that we could debrief in after a day in the field and kind of go over what we saw and what needed to get done the next day. There's some generators outside that can power some pretty basic equipment inside the dome, along with an oil burning stove for the cold nights. We were there in August and the temperatures hovered around freezing at night, maybe dipping slightly below. And then depending on if we had sunshine during the day or rain, we'd probably be in the mid 40s to mid 50s. So you can see all the speckled colored dots on the lawn there. Those are our tents. And this is where we stayed for 2 weeks. So one thing that I want to talk to you guys a little bit about is some obscure camp chores. So the first night we were there, we had a caribou wander into camp, and everyone was kind of surprised at how close it was getting to us. We thought maybe it was just because it didn't see people that often, and then it promptly keeled over dead. So we were all pretty shocked and didn't really know what to do. We just loaded it up in the side-by-side and brought it a little bit a ways from camp just to make sure that we didn't have any visitors looking for a snack. Another thing that we had to deal with up there is burning all of our waste. Pretty much everything that isn't glass or that will burn was burned. The permafrost tables are so shallow up there that especially human waste will never degrade. So burning it is really the only way to get rid of it. If you don't burn it in the incinerator, you have to take it out with you. So it's much easier to take care of it while you're there than to fly with a large plastic bag full of human waste. Just a little bit more about the helicopter operation. So on this trip, we had 8 two-person teams and 2 helicopters that facilitated bringing us out to our sites each morning. We'd start around 8 o'clock and the helicopters would traverse people out, drop them, come back, grab new groups, and do that until everybody was out. And then we'd follow a similar pattern for pickups in the evening. These little helicopters have pretty far ranges, could service this entire area, and can easily carry 2 people, a pilot, and all of our gear. You go next slide, Phil.
Yeah. Before we arrived in the field, I just want to talk about the ecological planning that went into this. So before we arrived in the field, it's important that we have a field key to work off of, as no one on our crew had conducted survey work in this MLRA before. So there are currently no ESDs for this MLRA on the North Slope, so we fell back on other models. Blaine Spellman, our Fairbanks ecologist, finalized a key using landfire biophysical settings models and the Alaska veg classification concepts. So the BPS models provided spatial, tabular, and narrative data, while the VERIC models provided further background about known communities and disturbance. On this slide, these are the BPS landfire models. So the unvegetated areas are mapped in dark blue. Tan is Arctic Tussock Tundra, and then the light blue is Arctic wet sedge meadows. So we knew we were going to be dealing with some wet communities and some wet ground. And just in the top left map, so that dark blue band right across the middle is actually the Brooks Range. So that's all unvegetated mountain that's holding back the forest from moving further north. So the other part of planning ecological work was determining our field team. We don't have a lot of ecologists in Alaska. So for this trip, we had 2 NRCS ecologists, myself and Jamin Johansson, and we brought on 4 Soil and Water Conservation District employees from Homer and Anchorage. Day to day, our teams are divided into 1 soil scientist and 1 veg person. Veg data sheets are designed to be simple to use, and each data field has a home in NASS. Ecosite data includes a plant list with foliar cover, as well as boxes for site information. We also include Katina sketches, which help describe the community and ecological processes within the context of the surrounding area. And then at the end of each field day, we held a correlation meeting to just discuss what we saw and update our field key.
So like I talked about before, this area is dominated by permafrost, and most of these soils have some type of cryoturbation. I just want to talk about that a little bit. I'm not sure how many folks are familiar, but basically cryoturbation is the frost churning or the mixture of the soil. And this happens from annual freeze thaw, and it normally brings the organic materials from the surface down into the subsurface. You can see in this picture that there's quite a bit going on here, and this makes for pretty difficult descriptions. So like I had mentioned, difficult descriptions, these aren't necessarily NRCS friendly. It's very common that you'll have something here like on the left side of the screen with an organic horizon going past 50 or 60 centimeters. And then just a couple inches to the right of that, you won't have any organic material going down that far. So what we do, or how we handle instances like this, is we'll take averages from all across the pit face and try to do the best we can so we can get it into a format that's easily accepted by NRCS. So for the survey up there in the major map units, or at least preliminary ones, we have some Tussock Tundra, which is where these polygons live. We'll talk about those a little bit more later. Some drained lakes, a different style of polygon, and then maybe some relict dunes. These seem like there's kind of a cyclical nature to all of these different areas, but we're still kind of untangling that as we go through the soils and ecological data.
So conditions for collecting vegetation data was okay. It was early August and fall. As Mike said, we were already getting snow. We had ice on the helicopters. So fall was definitely there. You can see the bearberry in the top right turning bright red. It's pretty nice to see out there on the tundra. Fortunately, we still had some flowers in bloom as well. The bistort in the bottom left and the March arrowgrass in the bottom center made IDs a little easier for us, which is always helpful. Total species diversity was kind of mixed. For the most part, sedges were very diverse as a group, while shrubs were not. Most of the vegetation was facultative to obligate wetland, graminoids, and forbs, which is what we expected. There are areas of well-drained soils that had less hydrophytic species and more dwarf shrubs. In most cases, ecological sites were pretty well defined by their vegetation. I don't know if this is loaded yet, but I'm going to start talking. So the first thing we saw there was the Tussock Tundra, which just was everywhere. It just defines this landscape. It covers a large part of the survey area. A perched water table sits atop permafrost throughout the growing season, so that's why you end up with hydrophytic vegetation. Fire is usually infrequent and low intensity. We didn't actually record any fire sears during this fieldwork. In areas of Western Alaska, where we also work, the Tussock Tundra reference plant community usually rebounds very quickly from fire. Its tussock growth protects rootstock, and other species usually grow back from undamaged rootstocks or outside seeding.
Okay, for soils on the Tussock Tundra, we saw quite a bit of aquaturbels, which is just a cryoturbated gelosol. And then we saw some, a lot of organic gelosols, or some of these pterochemistals. And I just wanted to add to what Phil said about this being the most dominant feature of this area. So when people say the Alaskan tundra or the northern tundra, this is what they're talking about. This area covers a huge swath north of the Brooks Range. And as you can see from this picture, it's just a slow, undulating, small rolling, no treed, just vast area.
The second thing, or another community we'd like to just point out, was Polygonal Ground. These had their own unique challenges. They come in two varieties. Low center polygons in the top right photo have 3 communities. Hydrophytic veg in the low center, shrubs on the edges, and an emergent wetland community above the ice wedge trough. High center polygons in the top left have 2 communities, diverse shrubs up top, and then a wetland community around the edges. We decided to describe these polygon ecosites as separate them into 2 ecosites because the transition from high to low is usually 200 to 500 years, which is a much longer time scale than our ESDs typically describe. And we also decided to separate the communities within each polygon just because they're so well defined and they match up and are clearly linked with the underlying soils, which are very different as well.
Yeah, so I just want to show a little bit more about how these form and what they look like on the ground. So the polygons themselves are quite large, and they form from these ice wedges kind of pulling the ground apart and water pooling and refreezing each year. So there's definitely some type of cycle of how these form and then degrade and reform, and we're just not quite sure of the exact time frame. From a soils perspective, it's pretty predictable what soils you're going to find when you dig on certain types of polygons, but it's very diverse depending on where you dig. So you can see these three cores, which were taken with a Cypri auger, which is just a powerized machine to take the permafrost cores out of the ground, all came from within 10 meters of each other. So if you dig in the low area or the trough, you can see the core on the very top is going to contain a ton of ice. And then if you dig maybe in the center, you'll get a completely different soil, or right on the rim even, something that's going to fall into a completely different category. So this makes for an interesting exercise in how exactly these are going to get mapped and what the map units will include.
The final community or ecosite to touch on are these dunes. They're like these relic dune ridges. They are, as you can see, the bottom left, they're pretty far away from the existing water now. So they kind of give you a picture into the past of where the water used to be, because these are usually found up against large lakes and ponds. So these dunes are well drained. Permafrost is either absent or very deep. So we saw a notice shift in the vegetation. This landform is slightly raised and supports low-lying vegetation, often associated with convex exposed alpine sites found in the hills and mountains to the south. Slow-growing shrubs and lichen dominate. The lichen communities were often decimated by winter browse, suggesting these are very important sites for caribou.
From a soils perspective, the dunes are pretty straightforward. They're very sandy. There's absence of permafrost, and they're pretty similar throughout the entire study area. So if somebody found one of these dune features on the landscape, the soils group up and match up really nicely.
We did come across some interesting features out there, I guess is a good way to put it. So I came across this mystery community. It's just this linear band of darker sedge that just went out to the horizon. The plant community is the same in the dark and the light areas, and there was no real underlying processes that would explain this. We eventually determined it's not a natural feature, but this is actually the location of a winter ice road. So these are used for transportation between villages and work sites during the winter. The underlying veg is likely experiencing a delayed growing season, and site hydrology is probably affected as well. Just some ecosite results. We ended up with 229 veg data points. Our data sheets were QC'd. They're all entered into NRCS. Our original key was updated. We ended up with 12 ecological site concepts, 7 matching the BPS models, and 5 of our own description. Survey-wide, most foliar cover is comprised of herbaceous species. Medium to low shrubs were pretty much restricted to along the rivers. Obviously, there are no trees. Locally, plant communities were shaped by site and soil characteristics. Wet areas tend toward herbaceous species. Better drained areas are less hydrophytic species. Noted disturbances include fire, flooding, ponding, erosion, and frost heave. We do have low intensity burns in the area, flooding and ice bulldozing along the rivers, and then erosion was primarily noted on the dunes. The next step on the ecological side will be to create state and transition models for our concepts, and then conduct a correlation meeting with the project soil scientist. And that's it. I hope we didn't go too long. This is our full staff. As you can see, plenty of NRCS scientists, 2 NRCS ecologists, pretty big crew. I think Mike will agree, we usually don't go out with 2 helicopters, but we just had 2 weeks to get everything done, so we kind of just piled in.
Thanks, guys. Great joint presentation there. There is one question in the chat, and hopefully there'll be a couple other questions. I think we have time for a couple more if people want to toss one in. The question is, any observation on how local caribou populations affect ecological communities in this region?
So the caribou herd up in this area has got one of the largest undisturbed, really native ranges. It does range into Anwar, so you do end up with caribou along the pipeline there. The lichen was decimated. They're obviously using this during the winter. It's their preferred winter forage. When we were there, they were still browsing on willow and graminoids, and they were only just starting to herd up. So like our first couple days there, we saw kind of singular caribou, 1 or 2 or 3 out there, and then by the time we left, their numbers were already increasing, so 10, 15 together. I don't know any specific information on their actual land use within these areas. I know it's their native territory. I know they come through here during their winter migration, and I know they're hunted in this area during the winter. So it's a huge area, and so I'm not exactly sure within our little slice of it how intensive the caribou browse actually is.
Okay, thank you. And another question. For the lower high center polygons, did you sample from the center of the polygon through the ice wedge?
Yeah, so I can take this one. So for the low and high center polygons, after the first couple days when we were kind of, when everyone was more suited to find these things in the field and decide like, yep, this is for sure what we're going to call, or what we've been calling, a low center or high center polygon, we would typically do a transect where we would start in the center, take a core, move a couple meters away, take a core, and we would traverse that so we could get a representation of the entire polygon. Now, one thing that I should mention is some of these low centers were full of water in the middle, and we only had, I mean, this is a pretty remote area. We only had a certain amount of permafrost augers, and if you get one of those things stuck out there, it's a pain to get them out, especially without heavy equipment or tools. It doesn't sound like it, but they freeze into the permafrost pretty solid, pretty quick. So some areas where it was super wet, we weren't able to extract soil as deep as we would have liked. But I think for the most part, we did a good job of capturing the variability across some of these polygons.
And I think we'll have one more question, and that's, do you expect that any of your state and transition models will be single state?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty common up here just because we go out to areas and there's no existing on the ground data. So the BPS models are usually all they're determined via raster satellite imagery and stuff like that. We try to, so for example, the Tussock Tundra, we didn't find any evidence of an early sear. What I will do, or whoever the project ecologist ends up being for this, will probably put a hypothesized early fire sear, base it off of, our existing evidence in Western Alaska, where we have a lot more experience mapping. Yeah, there's plenty of the 12 eco sites. None of them are coming to mind that will have exactly one. The floodplains will have 2. These dunes will have 2, because we do get that blowout erosion you see in the top right photo there. But yeah, it's definitely not rare. It's very common to have STM with only one plant community in it.
Okay, I'm gonna have one more question that we'll toss in here. The other questions will be available if there are more that come on the recording. And that's, how far can you extrapolate your observations? Meters, kilometers, tens of kilometers?
I can try to answer this. I think that's a really good question. If we had a map, maybe Phil can kind of go through the slides to see if we can get a reference here. But if you look at that area, it's definitely a defined chunk of it looks exactly like this. And I said up there to a bunch of people while we were up there, it's like being in the Twilight Zone. Like, it is the weirdest place I've ever been. When you're flying in the helicopter, you can look out the window, look back in the helicopter, close your eyes for 30 minutes, look back out, and it looks like you haven't moved. It's very similar out there. So I think this will obviously be up to the project leads, but depending on how far they want to extrapolate and what they're comfortable with, I think we'll be able to go quite a bit outside of the project, or outside of our at least general area of where we dug our transects, to kind of help classify some of these things.
Yeah, so we typically map at order 3, and I may be wrong here, but I believe this project is also order 3. And then, as far as the ecosites go, extrapolating these ideas past the boundaries will definitely happen. I mean, you can see on these BPS models that those kind of communities just expand. I mean, just millions of acres up there. So.
All right, thanks again to both of you for a great presentation and good answers to the questions, and we will move on at this point. I want to remind folks that the next webinar is going to be April 12th. I think we have presenters for it, but it's never too late to get in touch with your regional representatives and get a topic in and be able to present, if not at this one, at future ones. Excuse me. So our next presentation will be by Kristine Ryan, who's state soil scientist in South Carolina, and she'll be talking on status of the NRCS Proximal Sensing Tools Inventory. Kristine, the webinar is yours.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to share, and hopefully you guys can see it. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to give just a summary of the detail that I was on, a 60-day detail. Oh, I know I was introduced. I'm Kristine Ryan, South Carolina state soil scientist. Yeah, I'm just going to give it a summary of an overview and summary of what I did. So the detail ran from November to the end of January, and Dave Hoover had said that there's a need, and a few others, to figure out what we have, what tools we have, where they are. It was important to know, because we just need to know what we've got, so we don't, buy things we don't need, or we know what we don't have. So I was charged with, collecting information about our agency proximal sensing tools, and it didn't matter, the way that I took it, it didn't matter whether a state bought it or the SPSD. If it was purchased and it's used by NRCS employees, that was pretty much my, I apologize for the airplane. Sorry about that. There's several bases around here, so so I was just looking for NRCS tools and where they were and how they're being used. There's direction by, I'm just going to say, all the Daves, and also Mike Robotham, so that was helpful. We discussed expectations and deliverables. I was given some flexibility, which was nice. I was just given basic direction, what we need to know, and from there I just kind of determined the best way to do it, because it was a 60 days. And the deliverables, we're gonna work on them. I got some final edits, waiting on some comments, but then that'll be provided to leadership. And so I kind of already talked about it. So the biggest thing was developing a plan. Because of urban agriculture, the PXRF units are being bought by states and by the SPSD, and there's things that need to be done before these tools are bought. There's training that has to be completed, and so they wanted me to develop a distribution plan. There's 15 units at the National Soil Survey Center that have to be distributed. So they wanted a plan for me to develop a plan to distribute them in criteria. So I started out with that. That was actually kind of the easy part. And then working with Katina Johnson of the Radiation Safety Division to come up with, just to ask questions, things that I need to be aware of. And from there, I was able to develop a good step-by-step thing that people can follow before and during, while they own the tools, but especially before, things that they should consider before they purchase one, just to get everything set up. And then there's a development of the 5-year roadmap for proximal sensing activities and tools. This included initially it was a PXRF, the benchtop XRF, a GPR, EMI, and then on the questionnaire that I developed, I guess I'll go back. So along with the distribution plan, the first thing I did was develop a questionnaire. I'm sure many of you had received it. And this was the best way for me to figure out with basic questions where they are and how they're being used, who owns them. And there was a question for people to input any other tools, because it's really hard to account for everything that's being used. So I wanted to give people the flexibility to put in some tools that they were using. There's some really neat coastal zone tools going on. So there are some things that are being used, but it's usually very specific to some projects. So this roadmap, after examining all that and going through the questionnaire and writing the report, developing all these things, in locations and functions, that the roadmap kind of put together the next 5 years of steps that we should take in standing up this, using PXRF and urban ag and all the things that SPSD could do to support it. And from that, it was also looking at more staff, where they should be, suggestions, recommendations, and things like that. But I would say the most fun was finding out how the tools are being used. So that was really cool. And that was very, very helpful in the developing of the report. So then I had a questionnaire. Initially I had it as a Word document. And then I think within 5 minutes, Jason Nemenchek is a whiz, and he sent an ArcGIS survey 123, and then I directed people that hadn't filled it out yet to go there, because that was really helpful. And most of you, I think a lot of you have seen it, but I'll click on it here. My computer's been really slow. But yeah, so this is the questionnaire. And so he took the questions that were in the Word document and just basically put them into here. And so folks could enter in everything that they had, any other devices. I try to give people I wanted to give folks a narrative on how to do that. And the nice thing about this survey 123 is that you could actually, so the link I showed you was the questionnaire for you guys to answer, but there's also a back end where you sign into ArcGIS Online, and you can actually take those questions. You can export them. I exported them as an Excel. You could do it, as you could see. You could do them in different ways. I just exported them from Excel, and then each time every time you export it, it saves as a record. So I saved all those, but then I eventually, what I did was I created a master copy, and then I would export all those days that I exported were saved as a single file, so I could go back and check to make sure I had it right. But then I edited the headers and the rows and the columns, and then maintaining one master copy was easier. I could sort and analyze a lot easier. The deliverables that will be going to the national leadership is the 5-year roadmap. I don't need to read them all, but these are the deliverables. The report is there's some waiting on some comments and then the executive summary, because the report's kind of long, so hopefully the summary will get some good points so people can read through it easily. This equipment tracker actually I got from Ron Coleman in Illinois, and there are some geologists associated with the state that different states that maybe didn't get it, get the questionnaire, but a lot of them have, there's different tools through them. And so he provided that to me, and that's as a separate document because Ron's a whiz at Excel and created this neat spreadsheet. So I just kept it as one and I couldn't import it and keep the integrity of the spreadsheet. So I'm sending that to them, and Ron kind of saw a potential for an agreement and equipment sharing between geologists and some soils folks. So that, so that's a good way to go to. And the analysis, let's see, I'll go to the next slide. I don't have very many, guys, so I'm almost done. So the 5-year roadmap, I just have it starting this fiscal year going to FY26. And these are just snapshots of what I have based on what is needed and what is wanted. So there is a Teams channel that has a lot of really good information for leadership that I was, added to. There's a lot of research and a lot of things that are added there that I could kind of draw on, and some, legal opinions and presentations that people have given. And so that was really helpful. And so I just kind of pulled together a lot of the things that have been discussed at previous meetings and what we want to do, what we can do, what we probably couldn't, shouldn't do. And so I kind of took all of that and put it into a roadmap using the things that have been items that have been previously discussed, and taking into account what I have found through my questionnaire and what NRCS staff has provided. This analysis was kind of, I took all the tools and created like an outline form, mostly for myself, just to kind of get these ideas together based on different tools. As you can see, it was highlighted. I didn't highlight it for this presentation, just for myself when I was writing the report. As far as the resource needs and concerns, or the resource needs that NRCS staff has conveyed with PXRF, is soil contamination. That's what urban producers want to know. So that's the #1 question that we had for that. And then by NRCS staff, by people all over, it's like additional staff. Please, please, please hire people. There's a lot of really good things going on. But like everybody knows, everybody feels that everybody's pulled in different directions. So I'm hoping that what I provide can at least show like, hey, if we do this and this. So that was my goal. But across the board, it was additional staff. So that's definitely a concern and consideration that I conveyed. Sorry about that. And this tool inventory is just a screenshot. This is my master copy. And I think I had there's like 35 entries. Now I had gotten, sometimes people reported from the states, and then the regional director, there'd be a state soil scientist in the same region as the regional director was reporting. So I had to make sure I didn't double count things. So I went through, so more people responded, but I had to make sure that I whittled it down and I didn't double count or triple count some tools. And then this is the step-by-step guide. I had the executive summary, and then this is the the report that I created. So I'm still waiting on some reports, and hopefully we'll get that in this spring. I'll send it off, and then I can tie it up with a bow and send it on. And I will say too, the technology focus team that had the, I think it was on the 12th. Yeah, on January 12th, Andrew Williams and Tyson Morley in Altus, Oklahoma were really helpful. That was a really neat webinar. So they actually provided me some more information. So they had information about tools that I didn't have. So I also incorporated a lot of, Andrew provided me a spreadsheet, so I was able to take that and incorporate it. So that was really, really helpful. So that communication really worked. So I had more things to add, separate from the questionnaire. And then there's a Google My Maps feature that Dave Hoover had told me about and asked me to create a map that visually showed where all the tools were. And it's a really, really easy feature to use. Nobody needs ArcGIS installed, although most people do, but anybody can look at it, and you don't need an ArcGIS login. Oh no, this is a tutorial. But anyways, if anybody is interested in looking at my maps and doing something for them, it's a really easy. It's a really easy feature to use. And then so you could create layers within my maps, and then you could turn them on and off, and each time you put in an entry, it has a little attribute box, and then you can add specific location details or anything else that you want to add depending on what you're working on. And then you can update it as more information is gathered. And I just recently updated it yesterday, I think, just to double check Andrea's office locations with what I had gotten. So so I created one whole layer that has everything, so what each office has. So WadeBot in North Dakota, they have one EMI, but some areas might have some more. So Philip King reported PXRF and a GPR. So all of that, there's a master file that has all of them. But then if you're just interested in wanting to know where the PXRF locations are, they're here. So there's, in Greenwich, New York field office, they have one PXRF. Another thing I want to say too is on the master file, there's, I have the tools reported and then who reported it. That's just in the master file. So there's a person to contact if you have a question about it. So you don't have to, you could just know who to go to, who reported it and all that stuff. So then that's just on the master one. And so if you were to just go on the other ones, I just have the tool location. So and in Bismarck, they have a PXRF, but they also purchase a portable workstation to turn it into a benchtop as they need it. So there's there's 6 of them. The state of Texas purchased 6 of them. So that was nice to get that on the inventory. And then there's also the benchtop. This is where the benchtop XRF locations are. And then there's GPR. And it's nice to visually see where like some places don't have anything. They might, I just don't know if it was reported. I tried to get as many people to participate as possible. There might be some out there, but this is what I had gotten. And here's some EMI locations. They're a lot more extensive. And then other proximal sensing tools are most notably their MIR. So MIR is the top one that was reported. However, in Tallinn, they have the side scan sonar for the coastal zone specifically. And also on these MRIs and EMIs, if I knew the actual model, like if the model was described to me, I would add it. And if I don't know the specific model, it just says EMI or MIR or GPR. But I did get an updated list. So a lot of these MIRs that have been purchased, the list that I got from Andrea, they're all these Bruker Alpha 2s. And so those are the different layers that I created. And I guess I can send it out. I don't know the best place to put it, but that's something I can talk to SPSD about when I send all this on up. So this is all it's not meant to be secret. I would like for it to be readily available, and I can maintain it as I get more information, or it could be, if the technology focused team wants to take it on, that's fine too, but it's definitely dynamic and can easily be added to. And so, and that's about it. That's what I got.